XDefiant is one of the weirdest flops I've seen in years. Because the game didn't die like a total disaster. It died like a really fun shooter that just couldn't survive its own problems long enough to become a real habit. And that's the most painful kind of flop, because Ubisoft didn't just say, yeah, we're moving on. They literally said they couldn't attract and retain enough players long term to compete in the free-to-play FPS market. And it was too far from the results needed to keep investing. So the question is, did XDefiant deserve to flop? Or did it get executed for not being Call of Duty fast enough? Alright. Welcome back to episode 2 of my series, Did This Game Really Deserve the Flop? The point of this series isn't to dunk on games for sport. There's already a million channels doing that. This is more like what actually happened, what the game got right, what it did wrong, and whether the flop was inevitable. And XDefiant is the perfect case study because it had a strong start, a clear hook, old school arcade shooter energy, and a dev team that actually talked to players, but it still couldn't stick the landing. Before we start, comment right now, were you an XDefiant player? And if you quit, what was the exact moment you bounced? One word answers count. Hit-reg, sweats, content, Ubisoft. I want to see the pattern. So quick timeline so we're all synced up. XDefiant launched May 21st, 2024 as a free-to-play multiplayer FPS on PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. Then on December 3rd, 2024, Ubisoft announced it was discontinuing development, stopping new downloads and registrations, and keeping servers up until June 3rd, 2025. And that date matters because it basically means this wasn't a we'll fix it in a year or two situation. This was we ran the math and we're not funding the comeback arc. Let me be real, XDefiant had juice. It wasn't trying to be a milsim. It wasn't pretending it was tactical. It was trying to be that classic arcade shooter where you spawn, ego challenge, and get into trouble immediately. And one of their biggest marketing flex ideas was removing or reducing the kind of skill-based matchmaking vibe people complain about, trying to bring back that old school feel. And the objective modes, honestly, solid. Escort especially gave the game something to do besides team deathmatch but louder. And the Ubisoft theme park concept, factions inspired by Ubisoft worlds, was a genuinely smart idea on paper. Recognizable characters, ability kits, clear silhouettes. Also, for a launch, it shipped with a pretty chunky setup. Multiple modes, maps, weapons, like it wasn't empty. So, here's the tragedy. The bones were good. You could feel a version of XDefiant that becomes that comfort shooter. You hop on for an hour every night, but then let's say this as clearly as possible. You can't build a competitive FPS on vibes. You build it on trust. And the fastest way to kill trust is when players feel like shots don't register, you die behind walls, gunfights feel random, you lose and can't even learn from it. And this wasn't just Twitter whining. Even reviews at the time called out that hit registration and netcode needed improvement. In a shooter, every match is a tiny contract. I click the head explodes. If the game breaks that contract, even sometimes your brain starts doing that thing where it goes, yeah, I don't feel like getting gaslit tonight. And that's when people quietly uninstall. Not rage uninstall, not dramatic, just they stop logging in. And in free-to-play, that's death by 1,000, maybe laters. Here's the other reality. XDefiant tried to enter a genre where your competitors are basically content factories. And yes, XDefiant had plans, seasons, maps, weapons, factions, battle passes, the whole machine. But planning it and delivering it fast enough are two different beasts. Because if you're competing in the live service FPS arena, you're not just competing with Call of Duty, you're competing with Fortnite, Apex, Destiny, Rainbow Six, and whatever else your friends are currently addicted to. And if your game has even a short window where it feels stale, people don't complain, they just go somewhere else. And the brutal part, XDefiant didn't have the luxury of being pretty good. It needed to be, I'm skipping my other games for this. Because the market is not a friendly place where gamers politely rotate through titles like it's a buffet. It's more like a nightclub with a line out the door, and if your DJ messes up for 10 minutes, the entire crowd walks to the other club next door and never returns. XDefiant had a hook, but it also had a problem. A lot of people treated it like the Call of Duty killer, and that is the most cursed label in gaming. Because once you're branded as the COD killer, people judge you like this. Does it have the same polish? Does it have the same content depth? Does it feel as tight? Does it have the same pipeline? And if the answer is not yet, people go, cool, I'll just play COD. So XDefiant ended up stuck in this awkward middle ground where it wasn't trying to be ultra realistic. It wasn't trying to be hero shooter chaos like Overwatch. It wasn't trying to be battle royale. It was arcade objective FPS, which is fine, but to survive, it needed one more thing, a reason to become your main game. And I don't think it ever fully landed that identity beyond, this feels kinda good. Kinda good is a compliment, but it's not a business model. Ubisoft's official reason was blunt. They said that despite a strong start and a committed fan base, they couldn't attract and retain enough players long term to compete at the level they wanted in the free-to-play FPS market. So the game was too far from the results required to justify major investment. And Mark Rubin's community post hit a different angle. He talked about how free-to-play is a long journey, but the journey became too much to sensibly continue. Even though the game surpassed internal milestones and had over 15 million players total. So the story isn't nobody played it, it's more like not enough people stayed and not enough people spent fast enough in a market that demands both. And the fallout was heavy. Ubisoft said the decision led to studio closures and layoffs tied to the project. That's the ugly side of live service. If you're not printing engagement, you're burning money. So, did XDefiant deserve to flop? Here's my very honest opinion. No. The core game didn't deserve to die. There was a legit fun shooter in there. The pacing, the arcade energy, the objective focus. Those were real strengths. But did XDefiant deserve the consequences of its biggest problems? Yeah, sadly. Because in this genre, fundamentals aren't optional. If your netcode or hit-reg feels inconsistent, even occasionally, people won't commit. If your content cadence can't keep up, people won't stay. If your identity is pretty good alternative, people won't main it. And Ubisoft basically confirmed the exact outcome. Not enough players retain long term to justify investment. So I'd summarize it like this. XDefiant didn't flop because it was trash. It flopped because it wasn't reliable enough to become a habit in the most brutal genre on the planet. And in 2024 to 2025, live service FPS land, that's a death sentence. Now I want to hear from you. If XDefiant had fixed one thing instantly, what would have saved it? Netcode? More content faster, better progression, a clearer identity? Drop it in the comments. And if you want episode 3 of Did This Game Really Deserve the Flop? Tell me which game you want next. I'll pick the most requested one and go full on. Like if you miss XDefiant, subscribe if you love real gaming conversations, and I'll see you in the next one.